I'm happy to share that I'm not the smartest guy in the room. In fact, I'm happy to share I'm probably not the smartest guy on this podcast right now either. And so recognizing that, and as we go to make decisions, there's a ton of really experienced and intelligent people that we work with. And my goal is to make sure that we bring out the best knowledge, the best insight that we can, even if it's hard to hear, creating an environment that's safe to express your opinion.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Founders Ascent, the podcast where we look into the ascent of founders across the world. I'm your co-host, BJ. I'm here as always with Gavin, and our very special guest joining us, Todd Anderson, who is the CTO of PHINIA and has taken time out of a very busy travel schedule to come join us here. Todd has been sort of the CTO at PHINIA and leading the company, which recently IPO'd last year in June, and has gotten training from Harvard Business School and been all over the place, living in France for a time as vice president of PHINIA, and just so many great things. He also climbs mountains casually, and we're just really excited to have him on. Thank you so much, Todd.
BJ, it's a pleasure to be here and speak with you and Gavin. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, we're super happy to have you, and I'm excited to just jump in and sort of talk. So your background is as an engineer, right? And you've sort of just stepped your way up to CTO. Talk to us about that journey and sort of what brought you to where you are today.
Great. Well, if you don't mind, I'll start all the way back in grade school, middle school, high school. I was fascinated by how things work, and they enjoyed taking things apart and putting them back together, sometimes even successfully. But being able to understand the world around us was a big part of my interest and my background. And that led me to some classes in sciences and physics and mechanics, auto mechanics, which resulted eventually in a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering degree. My first job out of college when I graduated with my bachelor's was at a company called STEMCO in East Texas. I tell people it was my best job offer, and it was, but quite frankly, it was my only job offer at the time. So therefore, it was the best. But in all seriousness, it was a fantastic learning ground for me as a young engineer to come in as a product engineer, work on designing products for heavy-duty commercial trucks and trailers. So we did wheel end product design, hub seals, hubcaps, bearings, locking nuts. And the company was large enough for me to learn quite a bit, but small enough for me to get exposure and experience in all aspects of the business, even as an engineer. So that was the start of my career as an engineer. And from there, I had opportunities to lead our engineering team, to ultimately become our vice president of engineering. And when an opportunity came up for me to move over into operations, I gladly and enthusiastically took that step and wound up being a plant manager, working in manufacturing engineering, and ultimately leading our operations before moving into more general management roles. So maybe I'll pause there. That was the foundation of my experience that got me, I guess, positioned to move ultimately into the role that I have now.
Yeah, and sort of I think a challenge with a lot of engineers is what I think about like a geode problem. Like this, like a geode inside, there's so many like great ideas and looks great and beautiful technical stuff. And then when they get to like expressing it to the outside world, it's dull and boring and they just really have trouble communicating. And so was it difficult for you to step into an operations role from engineering? And or how did you build up the communication skills to do that well?
Well, thanks. What a great question. And I've always loved working with people. I have a genuine interest in people. And of course, any leadership role involves working with people. And in operations, especially, there's quite a wide variety of people from all different backgrounds and walks of life. So that was fascinating to me, and I loved it. You're right, communication can be a challenge. And in my approach was, I guess I would say, not in a demeaning way, but to make sure that if I was explaining something, that I was able to explain it in a way that maybe my younger brother might understand.
Mhm.
And that helped me not get carried away in my own mind with different terms and technologies, but try and communicate what something means and not maybe so much the steps that requires to get there.
Yeah, and I think working your way up to a CFO, that I think that, or CTO, I should say, is really important. Like being the bridge between the technology and the operations side of things. Like because I would say that it may not necessarily be a seamless communication between those two sides of a company. And so I guess honing in on that skill sounds very important over the course of someone's career that's looking to move up to someone that's in the C-suite, right?
You're exactly right, Gavin. And as leadership responsibilities increase, the my experience has been the time permitted to focus in on one particular thing sometimes will decrease. And with that decrease in time on particular subjects, it requires a honed ability to focus in on what's most important and not get distracted by the many complexities, and then be able to share that to our teams in a way that they can engage productively.
Yeah. And then talk to us a bit more about your career. We're still not quite at CTO, right? So you're
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah. We took a pause there in my operations role. As I alluded to, after being a vice president of operations, our company at the time was engaged on a growth strategy, which included inorganic growth. So I was part of a due diligence team that looked at acquiring a small family-owned business, which we did successfully, and then had the opportunity to step in as the first general manager of that company. So it was a fascinating experience for me. While I had had exposure to various functions and parts of the business and worked quite closely with our sales team and with customers and supply chain, I hadn't had that full profit and loss responsibility up until that first general manager assignment. I loved it, being able to be involved in all aspects of the business. And maybe, Gavin, to your point, to hone my communication even more, what's most important, setting key metrics was critical, and metrics that were able to move the business forward, recognizing there's 1,000 different measurements and requirements behind that, but what are the critical few that we have to hit to be successful as a business? Well, that was my first start in general management, and from then I successively received other responsibilities, including integrating other acquisitions, and then ultimately, it would be about a little over 5 years ago, accepted a responsibility within, at the time, Delphi Technologies, to be a vice president, general manager for one of their global product lines, as an expatriate in the United Kingdom near one of our plants there, which was a fascinating opportunity for me to work in fuel injection systems for all sizes and classes of vehicles.
And so that decision to accept that position, go all the way to UK, that must have been difficult. You deciding to go over there, bring your family with you, and do that. What was sort of your thought process on accepting that, and how did you do that?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that, because this will be forever burned in my mind. So I had this opportunity at Delphi, and in fact, I had another opportunity at the same time to, as part of some private equity work I had done, to step in and run a food processing company that made spices and mayonnaise. So quite different, and both of them were attractive offers, competitive offers, and both of them were very interesting to me. My wife and I considered quite a bit, as it truly was a family decision, as you mentioned, BJ. I'm not shy to say that we engaged in some prayer. I know that's kind of personal, but it's the fact of how we worked on making that decision. We talked with our family about it. I'll mention that the food processing company would allow us to stay in our home in East Texas. And as I mentioned, the one with Delphi had an international assignment. Well, we decided as a family, and after a lot of thought and prayer, that while it would be comfortable to stay where we were and keep going with our life and just have me change my job, we were more interested in living the experience of an international assignment, and so we selected that job. There were some benefits to that, in that I had background in the commercial vehicle and automotive industry, and so I was able to bring some of my experience and skills to that role, not just from a leadership sense, but from an industry sense. So that was a benefit, and then we loved the opportunity to work in another country and live there.
Awesome, yeah. And so you were in charge of that product line for globally?
Yes, so my first assignment was with our diesel fuel injection system product line. And that was for about a year and a half. I was responsible globally. While I had worked internationally in my prior role, this was the first global product line assignment I had. And I came to quickly appreciate different time zones. And when we talk about meeting at a certain time, you can't just say a time, you have to couple that with a time zone. So between connecting with Korea and China and Brazil and all over in Europe, it was a bit of a, do you know the expression, a drink from a fire hose, right?
Yeah.
I was thirsty, but it all came very quickly and all at once, and a challenging and exhilarating opportunity.
Yeah, and I'm interested in hearing about how moving around a bunch of different companies, how that helped you, and how you accumulated all those experiences to ultimately become a CTO. Do you think working at a bunch of different companies and gaining different experiences from all these industries helped you?
It absolutely did. And I love the fact we're always learning, right?
Yeah.
I mentioned to my engineers, whenever we think we know everything about a subject, that's when our learning stops. So in the spirit of humility, we're always learning. Of course, we know things, and we're paid to know things, and we need to be confident in what we know, but we always need to be learning. So Gavin, to your point, as I go to different companies and different roles and responsibilities, I envision myself like a sponge, just trying to soak up knowledge and information, and then being able to process it and apply it effectively is extremely helpful, to be able to think about, oh, I remember a similar situation with a different product line in this company, and this is how it happened, and this worked well and this didn't, and to be able to apply those I believe that experience comes when you explore and work at different companies, but it also comes with different functional experience. So between engineering and operations and maybe supply chain or quality assignments, by having a lens to look from those perspectives really broadens someone's experience base, and it did for me. It helped me be a better employee, a better leader, and ultimately a better technical leader for PHINIA.
Yeah. And so you were at Delphi, you were vice president and general manager for their global product line, and then transitioning to PHINIA, it was an acquisition, right?
Okay, so there's two more steps along the journey. And
Okay.
if I can make this allusion, maybe your listeners won't connect with this, but if you remember in The Hobbit, when Gandalf was leading the dwarves and Bilbo to go to Bjorn's house, and he first brought in the first couple dwarves, and then he led on to more and more and more. So I didn't intentionally plan it this way, but by pausing my journey along the career path, I didn't get right to the end, and maybe hopefully that helps as we complete the story to lend a little bit of interest to it. Okay, so here I am at Delphi Technologies as the vice president for a global product line. In October of 2020, Borg Warner, which is a large tier one global automotive supplier, acquired Delphi Technologies. And these numbers won't be precise, but in terms of scale, let's say that Delphi was somewhere around $3 to $4 billion in annual revenue. And Borg Warner was somewhere between 10 and 12. And I know I'm using some pretty broad ranges there intentionally to not be too precise, but you can imagine it was being acquired by someone that's maybe 3 times larger. Delphi Technologies had a governance model that was highly centralized. So the plants were just focused on manufacturing. Many of the business decisions were made by functional leaders throughout the business, which is a valid governance model, and that's the way they operated. Borg Warner had a more decentralized business model where the plant managers were business leaders responsible not just for manufacturing, but all of their operations. And then the functional global functions provided support. And that is also a very valid business model as well. We found benefit by moving to Borg Warner's business model. And as a result of that, we went away from global product line leadership structure. I was based in Europe and had the opportunity to then receive an assignment to work as vice president, general manager for Borg Warner's fuel injection system Europe region, which was the largest region for that business unit. So I was responsible for all of our products and for the P&L, the profit and loss of Borg Warner's fuel injection systems business within the Europe region. And that was really rewarding to me to work with, at the time, 6 different plants and plant managers and all the functions associated with doing that. I did that for about 2 years, a little over 2 years, and learned and grew both from Borg Warner experience and then just the process of leading a business like that. In July of 2023, Borg Warner had a strategic initiative that they had announced to move toward electrification and supplying electric vehicles. If we think back to 2022, early 2023, all the interest and quite a bit of focus and presence of the EV transition. And they had stated strategically a charging forward strategy to do that, which included divesting some of their combustion engine assets. So they did that by divesting what became PHINIA in July of 2023 as a separate, standalone, and publicly traded company. At that time, my responsibilities shifted from the Europe region to Vice President of Engineering and Chief Technology Officer, which is where I am today.
Awesome. Yeah. And so obviously going publicly traded is not really the CTO's responsibility, but can you just shed some light on kind of that experience from your perspective?
It was fascinating. Leading up to the spin out, we prepared some information to share with investors, and along with our CEO and CFO and our leader of the aftermarket business, I had a chance to engage in an investor day and share about our products and our technology. There was a big change between being a business unit within a larger corporation to being your own corporation. And like you said, the CTO plays a part in that, but I would say kind of a modest part related to our technology and our product roadmaps and engineering. But there was quite a bit of heavy lifting done by our corporate staff, our general counsel, our chief financial officer, who basically had to build entire teams, corporate teams that did not exist in our business unit before, and stand up this corporation. So it was a very intense time and an engaging time to be part of PHINIA. I like to share with our customers, we're one of the oldest one-year-old companies that you might run across. We have roots that go back a century, but we're just 12 months old as a company.
Right.
So I kind of want to circle back to what you were talking a little bit about earlier, and how I forgot which company it was at, but at each plant you were saying that they kind of manage it how they want to. It was sort of a decentralized company, right? And at each plant they almost have the creative freedom to do what they want. Can you talk a little bit more about that and what that looked like? Because that sounds very cool to me, managing a company in that way.
Yes, it was very cool, and I think we benefited from it. In fact, that was with Borg Warner, and we took many of those governance principles and have embedded those in our approach at PHINIA. So let me speak then maybe to our approach at PHINIA, which we learned from our experience with Borg Warner and then adapted for our company. What we call that governance model at PHINIA is the GOLD model. Of course, the automotive industry needs to turn everything important into an acronym, right? So no exception here. GOLD for us stands for globally optimized and locally driven. And I can share fairly simply what that means. One of the enemies of productivity and success is complexity. If we can minimize complexity, we can minimize cost, we can accelerate decision making, we can improve empowerment and engagement. And so those are all elements that are important to us. The way that we do that is by having this locally driven approach. So we have 4 regions within PHINIA: Americas, Europe, Asia, and then one that's a little bit different, which is our aftermarket region. Those regional VPGMs are responsible for the profit and loss of their businesses in each region. So let's say each one of them has 5 or 6 plants, manufacturing facilities that make stuff. Those plant managers then are individually responsible for the profit and loss of their plant. And they have all the resources and functions and assignments required to be locally driven. So each month on an earnings call, the plant manager for Juarez, Mexico, or Piracicaba, Brazil, or Izmir, Turkey, or Shanghai, China, will say, here's what my business did. And I'll report on revenue and material cost and manufacturing burden and gross margin and profit, et cetera, et cetera. And they're responsible for that. So in many ways, it simplifies and empowers our leaders to make decisions at what we would call the lowest possible level. I want whoever has the best knowledge of the situation to be making those decisions. And we have appropriate checks and balances in place, but that becomes their responsibility. So that's the locally driven part. And you're right, it's very empowering because we can go to those plant managers and say, you own this business. What would you do if this was your business? They're not looking for answers from corporate. If their revenue is falling, then the message, the question is, what are you doing about it? How are you going to work on that? Yeah. Oh, wait, your bill of material costs have increased. What are you doing? How are you going to make that business run? So that's the locally driven part. And then if I could spend maybe 2 minutes on the globally optimized part, which is a counterpart that helps the locally driven part work effectively. So there are global functional organizations that aren't too top heavy. There's product engineering, there's operational excellence, supply chain, some quality aspects of finance, et cetera. So these globally optimized resources are there to support the plants. So it's not like as engineering, we go to the plants and say, oh, you have to do it this way, you have to do it this way, you have to do it this way. We're there to support. So when I go to a plant manager and have a business review with them, I'm saying, hey, you're my customer. What can I do to help you be successful? How do you need engineering to best support? What's your biggest scrap problem? What's your biggest quality problem or product performance problem? Let's get our engineers working on that because we need you to be successful. So we're here to support. Now, there are some global standards. If everyone was just complete Lone Ranger and all on their own, then we wouldn't take advantage of volume purchases or things that we learn for a product line in one region that could apply to the other. So there's a bit of organizational maturity that needs to happen to operate this way, where there are global standards that have to be met, but the plant manager drives the business and global functions are there to support them. Hopefully that helps a little.
Yeah, it definitely does. That makes sense because you need to make sure that the top isn't too top heavy. Like your guys' goal is almost to follow what the leaders of these local branches of the company are almost telling you to do in a way. That does make sense. And so I guess it works in my head because you guys need, or each local branch is going to have different kinds of contracts with different kinds of companies, because if you're doing, depending on what country you're doing business in, obviously the standards are going to be different. The kinds of partnerships are going to be different because of culture and so on. And so I think that's a really cool way to run it. And I guess maybe a lot of other global companies do something similar where like the central top part, you guys are the support. You guys are mainly going in and helping where you need to, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I definitely can see it being challenging to implement, though. Like, for example, on the sales side, is that a local responsibility to form all those contracts, or is that a global responsibility to form the contracts? But then global says we need 200 million of these, and the factories are doing whatever they want and not fulfilling. So how does that work?
Yeah. Well, if we talk about sales, then briefly, there are a couple different aspects. One is, as in the automotive industry, we have some global customers as well. And of course, there are local customers that only supply domestically, whether it's in India or in China or Brazil. And then there are some that supply around the world. And we can think of OEM nameplates for examples there. So the way we approach that is each region has a sales team within that region. Those salespeople are responsible for helping build the plants and get those contracts. Now, if there's a global customer, wherever that global customer's headquarters are, which generally will be the ones that negotiate global contracts, then the sales team within that region owns that global customer. But if we're providing parts to a global OEM, we may negotiate a sales contract, but then the supply of those parts could come from various plants, and those orders would be placed on the plants against the customer's plants. So you're right, BJ. There is a level of complexity, and that's why I mentioned organizational maturity. There needs to be a little bit of give and take, and definitely collaboration and understanding. I feel fortunate within PHINIA. I haven't run across anyone that's only out for number one, for themselves. There's a real spirit of collaboration, and some of that may be our history where we've come from, living in this way. It has been demonstrated to be quite effective, but only if we're able to listen to each other, to give and take, and then to stick firm to principles, but maybe modify practices where needed.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And so it's a simplified organizational structure, but then there's the complexities that you have to work out. But at the end of the day, it does just make it simple. Okay, if they're in Europe manager handles it. Done. And
yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Exactly.
And so as CTO and in your various other roles, you've definitely had to make a lot of difficult decisions, right? Where you've had to choose between good options or work with imperfect information. What's sort of your technique for making those difficult decisions, and how do you think about them?
Oh, that's a great question. I like how you phrased that, BJ, that making difficult decisions many times is not a choice between right and wrong. Those are easy decisions, but between something good and something good, those are the ones that maybe require some additional thought. So a couple principles that I try to work on in making those decisions. The first one is it needs to align with our values, whatever decision we make. So those values of integrity, of humility, of product leadership. If I can look at a decision and one of them is not aligned with the values, one option is not aligned with the values, then it becomes fairly straightforward. Of course, there are many times when there are multiple decisions, and those multiple decisions may all align with the values, but have different directions or different outcomes. I'm happy to share that I'm not the smartest guy in the room. In fact, I'm happy to share I'm probably not the smartest guy on this podcast right now either. And so recognizing that, and as we go to make decisions, there's a ton of really experienced and intelligent people that we work with. And my goal is to make sure that we bring out the best knowledge, the best insight that we can, even if it's hard to hear, creating an environment that's safe to express your opinion. I have encouraged my global leadership team, if we have 12 people in the room and 11 of them are saying, oh, this is absolutely the way to go, and you're number 12 and you feel differently, I want you to share that. I want you to share that, because the more insight, ultimately we need to make a decision. And lots of times in decisions, not everyone's going to agree or be happy. But the process of making that decision, if we can get as close to reality as possible, then we have the best chance to make the right decision.
Mhm.
So those are some principles that I try to apply to. Sometimes there may be a fear about management by consensus. That's not what I'm talking about. This is not a majority rules type of experience, but I do want to hear from everyone. And then some decisions, I would say in my role as CTO, I may make, let's say, between 6 and 8 critical decisions on an annual basis. And you'd say, oh, wow, okay, you're working awfully hard to make 6 decisions once a year, every year. What's going on? Well, why is that? Because I hire good people. I've got fantastic leaders, and I want them making decisions that relate. So our engineering directors who are responsible for product lines, they own those decisions. And I'm there to challenge them, to counsel with them, but it's their decision to make. And likewise, they have chief engineers working for them and engineering leaders and supervisors. So if we can instill that drive, that accountability to make those decisions for what they're responsible for, and support them with the right data, a safe environment,
Yeah.
challenging. This doesn't mean that we're not challenging. We have some very spirited debates with strong opinions, but the best information leads to the best decisions. So when we do that and then recognize that someone owns that decision, and as we move forward, then we support.
Yeah. And I think another component with that as well is stress. And I've heard the role of C-suite executives described to me as it's not necessarily that they're the best at making decisions. It just happens to be that they're the best at making decisions in stressful environments. And that's what it often times can come down to. It's can you make as good of decisions when you're in a stressful situation as or when you're not in a stressful situation, right? And I'd imagine a lot of the decisions that you have to make, especially those big ones, they're probably often stressful at times because you have a bunch of people knocking at your door, asking you to do other things or they're just so complex and they're going to affect so many different people. And so that's important too, right?
You're absolutely right. And if I can share with that in mind, something related to engineering and a CTO role in particular. So in many ways, operations, your pace of decisions and result of that decision is fairly quick. I can choose to turn on overtime and get parts out, or I can say, no, I'm not going to spend overtime, and parts don't go out. I see the results of that decision within minutes or hours. And so that's the nature of operations and the pace of operations. Now, in engineering, as we support operations, we play a part in that as well. As CTO, some of the decisions that come to my desk are ones that we may not know the outcome of that decision for years. So if we choose to do something in a certain way and there's a liability or potentially a latent product issue associated with that, the stress that I feel sometimes are the decisions made in this role have long lasting and long term consequences that we may not see immediately. So that gives me a pause and helps me in the process to make sure I'm counseling with other experienced folks, checking my thought process. So I may feel very strongly about something, but I love the opportunity to go to some of my leaders and say, hey, check me on this. I'm thinking this. What would you say? Oh, I don't see it that way. I see it this way. And being able to talk through that is very helpful. Sometimes the pace of decisions need to truncate that, and we make the best decision based on the data we have at the time.
Mhm.
And I've often heard that, especially the CEO, but as CTO, the right hand man on him for all things technical, right? CEO and other C-suite executives don't really get paid for anything other than decision making, because when you're stealing a $2 billion ship, a 1% better decision is $20 million, and that's hundreds of jobs. And like you said, you won't see that for 5 years, but it will make a difference. And so, and that's where the stress comes in, is you won't see it for years, and hundreds of people are sort of depending on you. But I think your method of going to those people who are relying on you and getting their advice, and not consensus, but just getting all the input you can, makes you better able to make those decisions, and make sure you may not be steering them the right way, but it's at least a way that everyone feels comfortable with, and it's not like you're just going wild doing your own thing.
Yeah. For me, this ability to have self-awareness is pretty critical, but not always easy, especially if I have a particular blind spot, then I could limit the organization if I'm not aware of that, and if I'm not careful to mitigate the risk of that blind spot. So having people that can check me on that, being open and vulnerable, which is sometimes challenging for people in a competitive and a professional environment, to admit, hey, I don't know this, or maybe my blind spot is I'm so close to this customer that what they say makes a lot of sense. Help me see the other side of that I might be missing. And that really helps if there's an environment and a relationship between trusted colleagues to call people on that in a productive way.
And so in getting that input, PHINIA is based in Michigan, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Auburn Hills.
Yeah. And so does it help to be in person in Michigan to consult with other executives, or do you find it's pretty easy to do that remotely from Texas and elsewhere?
If given the chance, I would always like to be face to face. There's something about being able to read nonverbal. What's the study? I can't quote it correctly, but what percentage of communication is verbal is quite small, and the other pieces we can pick up when we are in person. So video calls make a big difference. The wear and tear on a body of traveling around the world constantly is not insignificant. And so in some critical areas, it's absolutely vital to be there in person. And then we can get 85% of the benefit of connecting and communicating maybe via video chats. But if given the choice, I would much rather be in person. We can make it work otherwise, especially if you know someone and have a relationship with them.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think it's so important for us, the younger people, to get in the office as much as they can, because they need to understand what those dynamics look like in person, face to face. And so, like, when I go into the office for my internship, I'm making the effort to get there, right? Like, as much as I physically can. And it's only online if I have to, or if my entire team's going to be at home or something like that. And so that's something I really tried to do, and I think it really benefited me, just having that face to face talks with people, because I think it's so important, especially for the younger generation.
I applaud that, and I agree completely. It's the communication that happens in the in-betweens that gets missed if you're remote. The stopping by someone's desk, or, hey, do you have a minute? And those conversations are invaluable for picking up, whether it's workplace formative norms, for example, or even just experience in particular topics.
I think I saw a like news headline that said remote workers will never be CEO, which is a similar line. Like, do you think you would have sort of acquired the same expertise you have if your whole career you worked remotely and over Teams and Zoom or other?
Yeah, it would be very difficult to do that, and the lag time or lead time to get that same level of experience, if it's even possible. So, I think it's definitely a challenge if to gain that same level of experience and insight and relationship building remotely.
Yeah, and the unfortunate thing is a lot of these remote jobs are trending right now. It's what a lot of people are looking for because everybody, especially our age, they want to be a nomad. They want to be the 20-year-old that's out and about, being in a new place every 3 months, and you obviously can't do that if you don't have that remote job. And it's hot right now. I understand why it's hot, but they I think they need to take into account what they're going to be missing out on if they're not already,
I really appreciate that. And one of the reasons I'm so connected with that, one of the things that I've done with our engineering team working through our HR group is have a talent mobility program where we can have assignments 3 months in one area, 2 months in another, and be able
Yes.
to experience in
Smart.
different areas, because I want our young engineers to have those experiences. I
For sure.
want to be a company of choice to work with, and being able to provide an environment and an experience like that both suits their needs, but also helps the company.
Yeah, and the truth is, if you guys implement that, you're gonna have a lot of people knocking on your door.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Thank you.
The other takeaway from this is for your startup founders, there's a very real need for teleportation. So get to work. We need
Yep.
we need a teleportation startup going. Yeah, awesome.
Yes. Either that or multiple cloned holographs that could have the
Yes.
same experience. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah.
That works too.
And then if we can talk a bit more about the technology. So PHINIA is working on hydrogen and carbon-free, uh, uh, basically car parts. Yeah. Um, from what you can tell, what needs to happen to actually implement sort of a zero carbon solution? Because in some senses we look very close, in other senses it's just cost prohibitive to make that infrastructure switch. And so what do you think kind of needs to happen for that shift to occur?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because with this being a founder's ascent, I wanted to share something that was entrepreneurial or nascent or beginning. And in a lot of ways, while we've been going at it for a number of years, our hydrogen efforts are exactly that. So we provide fuel systems, diesel and gasoline fuel systems for everything from 1.1 liter engines up to 17-liter engines. So passenger car on up to heavy commercial vehicle, off-road, on-road. And as we look at that, there is a climate crisis. And we are, as a globe, not on track to meet the goals of the Paris Climate Accord, which is not rising global temperature more than 2 degrees Celsius, right? And so there's a need, a call to action to help decarbonize. Transportation and mobility is just part of that. Let's say 20 to 25%, with the rest being industry and agriculture and residential, but it's a big part of that. And so we have engaged our expertise and resources to develop a hydrogen internal combustion engine. So this hydrogen internal combustion engine takes hydrogen, gaseous hydrogen, and it combusts it just like you would liquid diesel or gasoline. And we have demonstration vehicles that are operating today showing similar power and performance profiles as their diesel engine counterparts. So the technology exists. We're providing it. We have over 70 OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, who have reached out to engage in anything from technology consultation to single cell cylinder engine demonstrations to full vehicles. And that's happening. BJ, to your question specifically, I'd say the technology exists for us to drastically decarbonize the transport mobility sector. All technologies are going to be needed to make that happen and to meet our global decarbonization goals. So we're not opposed to electric vehicles. They're there, they're critical, they have a sweet spot that they're very suitable for, they do an excellent job, but they're not the only answer. So we need the best of every technology where it's used most, and we provide that. Now, what prevents that from broader and faster market adoption? I would say three things primarily. One is the production of green hydrogen needs to increase. There's been a lot of facilities and installations that have been announced and are going in, but we don't have enough green hydrogen right now. Number two is infrastructure to develop that and get that to the point of use. So once we're making green hydrogen, it needs to be available for those people who need to use it in their transport mobility solution. And then number three is the cost of hydrogen is higher than what you might experience. Of course, it's lower volume. And so as these first two get addressed, the third one should be addressed as well. But those three things need to happen. And I've been on multiple continents around the world in industry associations, speaking with government officials and leaders to give a call to action. Let's get those three things. We have the technology, but to make it usable and to make it be a part of the solution for decarbonization, we need those three things quicker than where we're getting them right now.
And when you say that electric vehicles have their sweet spot, are you saying that hydrogen is better for like the diesel truck transport, or?
What we see is hydrogen ICE is very well suited, and I would say arguably better than electrification for vehicles in applications that are high power requirements, dirty operating environments, continuous use cycles, heavy loading. Those are areas. And so to your point, BJ, like heavy commercial vehicles, extremely difficult to electrify those. The weight of the batteries eats into your payload. The charging time, if you're using it as a commercial asset, is prohibitive. And so some of those things are challenging. While EV has a good solution, there are some applications that it's not as well suited for, and hydrogen ICE is well suited for those that I just mentioned.
Yeah, that's interesting. And to make cool products like this, do you guys have an extensive R&D team?
Oh, yes. Yes, we do.
Okay,
So
nice.
we have globally around 1,600 engineers, technicians, and scientists. We've got somewhere at PHINIA around 5.5% of our revenue that goes at a gross level toward research and development. And we have technical centers in every region in the world, multiple technical centers in Europe, in Asia, and in the Americas. I would love to spend time. We probably don't have enough time, but we are doing some fascinating, groundbreaking technology, laser ablation, where we're okay. I better stop, but we are using lasers to drill holes at the size of microns using femto lasers, 10 to the minus 15, to evaporate hardened steel parts and make holes for fuel flow that are 60 microns in diameter, something that you cannot wire EDM. We're doing some incredibly, some people say, oh, it's not rocket science. In fact, it's not rocket science. It is way, way beyond rocket science for us to do this technology for fuel injection systems that you pass on the road every day.
That's awesome.
Wild. Yeah. I mentioned this in the introduction, but Todd is a renowned speaker who who has talked all over the place and is coming. There's one coming up where you're speaking on the stuff as well, right?
Yes, I'll be at the International Automotive Show, the IAA in Germany, coming up. I'm speaking at Auto Mechanica, the largest global aftermarket show. And then later in October, I'll be speaking at the Hydrogen Technology Expo in Hanover in Germany. So we
Nice.
we make our efforts visible across the industry.
Phenomenal, yeah.
Yeah. I guess I have one more question before we move on to rapid fire, but I want to understand like kind of life outside of work. And you're a climber, and do you think the life outside of work and having fun in your free time, talk about how that enhances your job?
Well, it's absolutely critical. And I would say, some people talk about a work-life balance. It's challenging because a balance makes you think, oh, I'm going to somehow even these things out. And I'm personally convinced maybe there isn't so much a balance as making sure that there's time well invested in critical areas of your life. So when I'm at work, I need to be focused at work and make sure that I'm giving my best effort at work. But when I'm with my family, I want to be focused with my family and make sure I'm giving my best efforts with my family. And same with personal interests. So we hear about burnout, and we hear about stress and health and emotional related challenges. Those are things that are very real. And it's something that's on my mind that we're working with our teams to make sure that people have information and ways to cope and deal with that. So I really believe when people come to work, I want them to bring their whole selves to work. And I want to hear about your family, and I want to hear about your interests and make those connections. We spend way too much time of our lives at work to just be compartmentalized to this two-dimensional person. So let's be who we are, even at work, but then make sure that we're making time for life outside of work. There's lots of cliches we can say, but I think it's really, really important that we have life, a rounded life, whatever that means to you. And it may be different percentages and focus for different people, but trying to have a rounded life is really important. And it's important to me. Gavin, to your point, I'm a better employee when I take time to recharge, when I can be with my family, when I can be engaged in other things as well.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thanks for that. That is a great message to hear, and kind of jumps into our first question of the rapid fire. But yeah, these are just 6 questions we ask every guest, and we say keep it under 30 seconds. But that's a very loose guideline.
Got it.
The first question is, how much sleep do you get?
I get between 5 and 7 hours of sleep generally every night. When I'm traveling, it varies, but I would say on average, maybe just under 6 hours of sleep every night.
Okay. What's your favorite book and why?
Oh, wow. Okay. Just a minute. Does this count to my 30 seconds? I'm thinking, let's see. Superlative questions are hard for me, but I will say that probably let me say it this way. I love to read, and I enjoy all kinds of books. So picking a favorite is difficult. I have read The Hobbit. I alluded to this before, probably no less than 12 times since I was a little kid. So I could probably count that. I do read the Bible. I do read other scripture as well. So that's important to me on a daily basis. And then I would say more recently, I've enjoyed reading early American history books, which have been fascinating for me. So not exactly a favorite book, but hopefully that helps.
No,
Yeah.
that's great. Third question is, what's your advice for young people? Let's say you're back in college. What would you tell yourself?
Two things, and this has been done in a Harvard business study that studied successful leaders across multiple industries. So multiple industries to try and find out what are the keys to their success. Are they extroverted? Are they introverted? Are they, whatever. So after interviewing these hundreds of successful business leaders across multiple industries, they came out with two things. And these things I learned quite some time ago, and I give this as counsel to some of our engineers. Two things to be a success. One is pay the upfront price. And number two is do what you say you're going to do. So there's a lot more to success than those two things, but that's a foundation. If you want to be a successful rock climber, pay the upfront price, study your craft, learn it, practice it, do it. If you want to be an effective accountant, study your craft, learn it, pay the upfront price. That's number one. And then do what you say you're going to do is number two. So that's a foundation. While there are many, many other elements to success, that's what I would share.
Okay. What's most important to you in life?
The most important thing to me in life, I would say, I would probably have 2 or 3 items. My family is absolutely important to me. I really believe what someone has shared before, no success can compensate for failure in the home. So I could be the most successful CTO, but if somehow in the process of doing that, I lose my family, to me, that's not a win.
Yeah.
So my family is really critical to me. My relationship with God, I know that's a personal topic, but that's important to me. And the other thing I would say is living consistent with my values. So it doesn't really matter what happens in life to me. If I'm living consistent with my values, then I'll take whatever comes. But even if the most wild and wonderful successes happen in my life, if I'm not living consistent with my values, it's really empty and hollow. So those are the things that I would say most important to me.
If you could change anything about the world, what would it be?
It may be okay. So I'll share this, but it's not very well thought through. If we could remove contention and conflict, there would be, I think, an exponential growth in productivity, in safety, in quality of life, in happiness, if we just remove contention and conflict. I think about the times in my life where I'm engaged in contention and conflict in one form or other. It's not very fun, but it's not very productive either. And the times when I am able to minimize contention and conflict, whether it's professional, which is where I'm thinking right now, or personal even, then it seems like we're more productive, we're happier, and we would experience something I think remarkable.
Okay, and then last one here. How do you want to be remembered?
I would say yes. It would be nice to be remembered. Well, it kind of comes back to what's most important. In some ways, I see those questions as right. If I'm remembered as someone who had a strong desire and effort to be to be good in a family setting. If I'm remembered as someone who lived consistent with my values, then I would consider that a win. I'd put a tick in the W column for that.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I think that's a fantastic place to leave off with just your story of moving up from basically engineer now to CTO of a $2 billion company. And in
3.5.
3.5, I apologize. $3.5 billion company. Throughout all that time, living by your values, leading by those values, and establishing a really great organizational structure while maintaining a great family life and being able to do it all. That's just so great to hear. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Todd.
Yeah, thank you, Todd.
It's really been a pleasure. Thank you for the good questions, and it's my honor to be a guest on Founders Ascent. BJ and Gavin, thanks so much.
Of course. And to all our viewers who stayed with us all the way, thank you so much for listening, and be sure to like and subscribe. And we will see you next week, Tuesday at noon. Don't be late. We'll see you then.